This is Paul with All About Neurofeedback, and today I have Doug West with me talking about his practice and how he helps people with neurofeedback, specifically neurooptimal. He's located in the Vancouver area, and we've been working together on different projects for a number of years, and
hmm
great guys. So really excited to have you on board here today, Doug.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for inviting me, man. This is awesome. I really I love having discussions like this, right? And so I'm looking forward to getting into this.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I know kind of your history, but it's quite extensive, and I thought it'd be great to start with
Mm.
that. So, what is can you start just kind of talk a little bit about your background and what got you into
Sure.
neurofeedback and your qualifications, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I've been in the counseling field for 30 years, and I've always worked with youth and families, children, youth, and families. Started out in the school system as a art therapist, play therapist. I was working in directly in schools with families and providing art therapy and counseling for the most part. And as I did that over the years, I realized A, it was very hard work, and B, talk has its limitations. Very definitely has its limitations. I always found, as I got further and further into it, what I realized is some of the things that I'm seeing most, the themes that were really recurring, were emotional dysregulation. You know, counselors, what do counselors see most? We see people with anxiety, people with depression, people with impulsiveness and distraction, ADHD qualities, right? Those are all brain based, and they're all tied to emotional regulation. If emotional regulation is good, if it's you know, yeah, if it's good, then we don't see these problems as much. But most counselors would agree that's what they see the most is people who are struggling with emotional dysregulation. They're having a hard time managing really strong emotions. So that was my starting place, and that again, what I learned is there was a lot of limitations to talk therapy and even art therapy. Art therapy was very powerful tool, but it didn't work for everybody, right? And some people just don't want to do art, right? So I was always in the back of my mind searching for a solution to this ongoing problem, which I saw, which was most people I see have emotional dysregulation, right? Those are the people that we're seeing most. How do we address that quickly? Well, there's medications, and medications, it's kind of 50-50 whether that might work or not. And with medications, there's often a high chance of side effects or intolerance to the meds. So people have varying degrees of sensitivity to medications. Some people are horribly sensitive to medications, and so it's just not an option for them. That was the other thing I was realizing with all the groups that I was working with. Most um, the children and youth I was working with always seemed to have some difficulties in school. So they often had learning disabilities that were undiagnosed, or they had anxiety from trauma or concussion, or they were undiagnosed and may have had autism or ADHD, something like that. Um, so the question still was, how do we get that stuff in order and get that stuff in order quickly? Because with counseling, if you really want to help somebody with counseling, you're really trying to help themselves, right? And with counseling, you're trying to provide strategies so they can better manage themselves. It's really hard to teach somebody strategies if they're highly dysregulated, if they are not grounded, if they're impulsive, if they're distracted and lack focus, if they're not in tune with themselves. It's really hard to teach counseling skills. And so counseling is a slow journey. It works, it does work, but it's a slow journey. And I was always trying to get there faster, right? Lo and behold, 20, or where are we at now? 15 years ago, I meet a guy who is doing neurofeedback. I was working for a large autism service agency, and with autism, you see a tremendous amount of emotional dysregulation. That's sort of the starting place for a lot of people on the autism spectrum. they are often in a very heightened place. And it's because they're experiencing a lot of sensory overwhelm or overload. Um, uh, Trying to get those, so counseling with that particular group is very, very demanding, and it's not all that effective, I found. Because we had a lot of families who were in that place where they had a highly dysregulated child or youth, we didn't really have a great way of addressing it. We had tried all sorts of things: behavioral consultation, counseling, coaching. We had attached a child care worker to some of these individuals, a youth care worker. There were psychologists involved. There was psychiatrists involved. Sometimes the police were involved. We had social workers involved. Regardless, it didn't matter what intervention we used. It seemed to never, ever improve, right? In an effort to really figure this out, the director of the program that I was with decided, hey, we're going to bring a neurofeedback guy on. And I was kind of perplexed, like, neurofeedback, like biofeedback? And he said, yeah, no, I know this guy is going to do this. And so we'll bring him on and we'll just see how it goes, right? And I was like, man, I think this is kind of a waste of time and money. I don't think this is a good idea, right? And I don't think families are going to think it's a good idea, right? Because we're going to try this and it's not going to work, right?
Kind of like a lot of people when they first hear about neurofeedback,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So anyways, I think I actually bet him on this too. I think I bet him money that this is not going to work. And this gentleman gets involved. He's using this device, which to me looked very simple, right? Laptop, little box with wires, USB cable, power cables. He's sticking sensors on kids' heads, and I'm thinking, that's it. Like, this is not going to work. I was really thinking, oh man, this is not a good setup, but we'll see how it goes, right? Well, 3 weeks into it, what was clear is all the kids that were involved were actually doing fine with it. None of them had set up, kind of balked and said, no, we don't want to do this. So that was good. But 6 weeks in, what was really clear, and this gentleman was working with 4 of our most difficult families. And by difficult, I mean these were children, again, we had tried everything with, and things were still spiraling. They were still spiraling downward. So he got involved. 3 weeks in, things were going okay in terms of the children were into it. 6 weeks in, so like 6 sessions in, things started to stabilize, and not just with one case, but all the cases he was involved in. And it was kind of, it sort of left me scratching my head, going, well, that's kind of interesting. And I was involved with the families because I was the regional manager, and what was clear is there was an absence of the drama that was really quite characteristic of these families, like high drama, lots of chaos, because it was all focused around this child who was highly dysregulated and very disruptive. Now things had stabilized a little bit, right? So it got just a little bit quieter, right? And it was like, what's going on? What's going on there, right? And so as I watched as time unfolded with these cases, that grew, that stabilization, that relative calm in the absence of chaos, right, started to grow, right? And I was like, wow, well, this is pretty interesting. And so I started to talk to this neurofeedback guy a little bit more and find out more about this rather simple looking system. And he was using the Neuroptimal system. This is back in 2009, right? So he's using Neuroptimal, an older version of Neuroptimal. Wasn't doing any counseling. He was just running a session, 33-minute session with these kids, right? And what was cool about it is nothing was demanded of the individual. They just had sensors on. They're listening to music. They could be chatting with the counselor. They could be playing a game with the counselor. Literally, because it's an unconscious process, he explained to me, they could be consciously doing something else at the same time. And I was like, brilliant. Wow. I'm amazed. Like I was kind of floored. I was like, geez, this really works. Why does it work? I don't get this, right? So I did a lot of research and found out, neurofeedback's been around a long time. So in 2009, the research that I was able to find indicated that neurofeedback had been around since the 60s. and that NASA had been using it. High performance athletes were using it. People were using it doing studies with ADHD and anxiety and depression, all sorts of things. I'm like, why is nobody talking about this? Why isn't anybody using this? Right?
That's
Why
actually a
are we?
good point, Doug. Why are
Yeah,
people not talking about it? I think it's
yeah.
because it's a non-pharmaceutical, right?
Well, yeah. That was. I got so many great stories, man. Because
Well, take your time,
as
man. I think this is interesting.
I was researching and trying to better understand this and better understand the context of why wasn't this being used. This works. We've tried so many things. There's so many people who are suffering, and this worked. Why aren't we using it? So just by chance, a very prominent psychiatrist in Vancouver, whose name escapes me right now, but anyways, he was doing a presentation um, for the parents of autistic kids, and the focus of the presentation was comorbidity within autism spectrum, right? How to address the comorbidity factor. So how do we address the anxiety, the strong emotions, emotional dysregulation, right? That's what, and I was
Right.
like, oh my God, this is brilliant. This guy's going to be talking. I got to go see this guy, right? Because if there's, he's a psychiatrist. If there's anybody who would know anything about neurofeedback, it would be a guy like this, right? He's been around for a while. So I actually went with a friend of mine who was a behavior consultant, and the whole thing was being filmed. There was probably about 400 or 500 people there watching this. It was downtown Vancouver. A lot of counselors there, a lot of other professionals there watching this, a lot of parents there. Anyways, he started to talk about different interventions that he thought were of great help. So he talked about, behavioral consultation. He talked about occupational therapy, and this is again to address the comorbid issues, right? Anxiety, depression, suicidality, all sorts of things. Talks about OT. He talks about counseling. He talks about drugs. He talks about acupuncture. He talked about all these things that I'm like, okay, here it comes. He's going to talk about neurofeedback any second now. And he's not talking about it. And I'm going, okay, well, he's going to get to it for sure, right? This is a fairly long presentation. It was a couple hours. Anyways, about halfway through, he said, hey, if you've got a question, because we're filming, I really don't want you to raise your hand. I'd rather you just wrote your question on a cue card and handed it in, and I'll get to the questions in a more orderly fashion. That way, it'd be less chaotic. I thought, brilliant. Okay, so I write my question. Please speak to us about your knowledge of neurofeedback in addressing comorbid conditions with autism. Right? Boom. I hand that in. He's talking and talking. He's answering all these questions that a lot of people had asked questions. He's answering all those questions. And then I'm looking at my watch and I'm going, there's only about 10 minutes left. And he hasn't addressed my question. And he goes, okay, we're going to be wrapping up pretty quick. And I'm like, oh no, what? He hasn't got to my question. So I throw my hand up and he goes, I'm sorry. Could you please write your question on the card and hand it in? I actually did that and you haven't gotten to my question. And he goes, oh, what was your question? And so I say, well, I'm wondering if you could tell us about your knowledge and experience with neurofeedback in addressing these comorbid conditions. And he goes, oh, yes. Can we turn the cameras off, please? Turn the cameras and mics off. And I was like, what? And he
Wow.
says, okay. He goes, there's no research that shows that it works. Okay, we can turn the cameras and mics back on. Thank you. And I was like, what? What just happened there? What just
Why
happened?
do you think that is, Doug?
Well,
Why
it
are
was
they so
interesting. So I'm looking at
yeah?
my friend and she's looking at me going like, what just happened there? That was bizarre. And afterwards, what I failed to recognize on the podium that he was speaking from, it said Pfizer, right? This whole thing was actually funded by Pfizer for him to go and talk about these conditions, right? And
Right.
I thought, you know what? He actually just did me a huge favor. He did me a huge, because at that point I did not have a system. I was still trying to understand neurofeedback. But what he verified for me is it works, and the drug companies don't want you to know about it, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm buying a system. Right? I'm going to buy a system, and my wife thought I was crazy. A few people thought I was crazy, but I said, no, this works. It works really well at addressing what I see the most, right? I bought a system in 2010, and I have been busy ever since. No turning back at that, since that time.
I
I've
know
been
you
busy.
focused a lot on autism in your
Mhm.
previous background there, but what other things do people come in for? Like what do you help people with more than just autism?
Well, there's a lot of conditions related to autism, um, uh, and so ADHD is a big one. If you've got autism, the chances that you also have ADHD increase by 50%.
Okay.
Um, and it's also true the other way too. If you've got ADHD, the chances that you have some autistic qualities is very, very high. Again, it's about 50%. Um, ADHD is an interesting thing because it varies in how it manifests. You have impulsivity, you have executive functioning challenges, so those an inability to plan, coordinate, to schedule, to stay focused, to attend, to see things through. Those are compromised with ADHD. So, autism, ADHD, concussion is another one that I seem to see quite a bit of. What's interesting about concussion is what is often the case is the brain is left in a very sensitive place after concussion. It's highly sensitized, and that actually manifests with very similar symptoms to what we see with people who are highly dysregulated. Trauma, too, leaves the brain in a very sensitized place. So when I say sensitized, it means like we're feeling things more intensely. So trauma,
Just
of
sorry to
course.
interrupt, but would you say that most of the issues that people face with mental health are more focused on they're actually brain-based issues instead of chemical-based issues?
100%. Now,
Yeah.
understand this. Your brain communicates electrochemically, right? It is a combination of the two, right? Your brain communicates with the rest of the body electrochemically. And so what we're doing with neurofeedback is we're really trying to tune up that electrical communication that the brain does, with the central nervous system, and really assisting it to work to its best ability.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It is very
So,
cool.
so that's primarily focused on, like you've talked a lot about children and the youth, but you
Mm,
also, I know you also help adults. So things like anxiety
absolutely.
and stress and those
Yeah.
types of things are also a big part of what you help people with, right?
Well, yeah. Here's the thing: is there's a lot of people walking around who don't know what's going on for them. They may have a diagnosis, or they may have autistic qualities and not understand that, or they may have ADHD qualities and not understand it. They may be walking around with the effects of a concussion that happened 10 years ago, and those symptoms are still carrying forward. The symptoms could be headaches or heightened sensitivity, distraction, all sorts of things. Uh, the brain has a tendency sometimes to get stuck in certain patterns. Trauma causes that. Trauma is
So
very impactful
emotional
to the brain.
trauma too, though, right? Not just physical trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Emotional trauma is highly impactful. Emotional trauma, it's like it imprints the brain, and so the brain gets into this heightened fight or flight response as a result of the trauma, which is appropriate. The brain should do that in response to trauma, right? To a traumatic event. It's readying your brain for fight or flight, right? Dangerous things are happening. I need to either fight or I need to get out of here, right? So we want the brain to do that. But once the trauma passes, the brain should go back to sort of its baseline. It's sort of it's kind of its best place, so to speak, so it can adapt, or so it can respond adaptively to what's coming next. But what often happens with trauma is the brain, especially prolonged trauma or multiple exposures to trauma, right? So I think of first responders, and people who've grown up in wars or highly unpredictable, uncertain
Or even
times, right?
relationship,
Or even
problems, right? Like
relationships.
all kinds of
100%.
things can trigger that, right?
Yeah. And not just trigger, but cause the brain, if it's sustained trauma, And by sustained, what I mean is, like, if the home environment, for example, as you were just pointing out, is unstable, chaotic, unpredictable, hostile, right? The brain stays in that fight or flight place because
Right.
it's trying to keep you safe. It's trying to keep you safe, so it's ready for anything. It remains in that hyper vigilant state, right? Because
So it
it's
really
trying to
comes down to
protect you.
brainwaves, right? Like
Well,
that's a big part of what's causing those kind of things is dysregulated brainwaves.
well,
Is that correct?
I don't think about it as brain waves specifically. My
Okay.
training is with neuroptimal neurofeedback. That's the system I use, and I think about it differently. I think about it as resilience and flexibility. Right,
Okay.
a flexible brain is not going to get stuck in a particular state. Right, it's going to respond appropriately and then come back to its baseline because something else is going to come along, right? So the brain has to remain adaptive to moment, right? Again, that fight or flight response is appropriate if there's danger, right? But we don't want to stay there all day. You know,
Yeah.
if I've got a meeting I got to go to and I need to be on for that meeting, if I'm agitated because I'm in this fight or flight response, then I'm not very productive, right? And I'm not
Right.
when my so our days, everyone's day changes from moment to moment, and so we need to be flexible and resilient to each of the things that are occurring in the day. Does that make sense? I'm not
It
sure if I
does.
answered that as fully as possible.
No,
But
I get what you're
you were
saying.
asking
It's a
about,
different way of looking at it from brainwaves to,
yeah,
resiliency, right?
you
But
know,
it's
the top,
essentially the same idea in one way, right?
yeah. There's a long history with neurofeedback. It's been around for 50, 60 years. And what I would call traditional neurofeedback, they are focusing specifically on brainwaves.
Okay, got it. I
And they're
see the
usually,
difference.
yeah,
Okay.
they're focusing on, if a client comes in, what they will do is do a brain map. So this is linear systems. What they're doing is they usually start off with a brain map to get a sense of where the trouble spots are, for lack of a better term. And from that brain map, they may determine, hey, you've got ADHD, or hey, you've got anxiety. We can run a protocol to address that anxiety. And so what they'll do is they'll run a training program to a protocol. The protocol is based on a normative sample, right? We've sampled 200 people, and this is what quote unquote a normal brain looks like in terms of anxiety, right? Then
Oh,
they'll
isn't
train
there
your brain.
databases of those samples? Like I heard
Yeah,
one was like
yeah,
60,000 kind of
yeah.
samples.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Okay.
what they're doing is
I
they're
just want to
always,
be,
yeah,
fair to both sides, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I know the neuroptimal side far better than I know the linear side, right?
Okay.
Um, uh, they're always basing it on a sample. Um, and so they're running a protocol to address the symptom, and they're usually running a protocol like one at a time. So if it's anxiety, say you've got anxiety and ADHD, they'll choose usually the anxiety first, and then they'll address the ADHD. Um, and they'll run a protocol, 20 to 40 sessions to address the symptoms. Then they'll do another brain map to assess, okay, where are we at in terms of it coming closer to that sample, right? So so they are definitely working with brainwaves. I'm not working with brainwaves. I'm
Right.
working towards resilience and flexibility.
Okay.
I'm not. Neuroptimal does not run a protocol. It's whole brain training. It is we're really tracking the EEG at a rate of 256 times per second across 20 targets in 4 dimensions. What I'm looking for as a clinician is, and it comes in the form of self-reporting. I'm asking clients questions as sessions unfold, really trying to get a sense of the shifting that's occurring in terms of duration, intensity, and frequency shift of their symptoms. So by duration, how long does your anxiety last when it's happening? How intense is it? That's the intensity. How frequently does it occur? Does this happen once a week? Does this happen 5 times a week? Does it happen every day? You know, I'm tracking those symptoms um, rather than looking at the brainwaves specifically, right? Um,
Okay.
Neuroptimal is very different from linear systems.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll probably
I'm
talk
quite
further
familiar
about
with it.
that.
We had a clinic at one point, and that is what
Okay.
we used was Neuroptimal. So,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So, when you see there is differences between the two, but they're both effective. It's just a different
Hmm.
approach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But where
It's
you're
important,
unique
if
is,
if you don't mind
go
me
ahead.
interrupting, what's important to understand is the developers of Neuroptimal came from that linear camp. They were highly um, highly effective using linear systems as clinicians. Doctors Val and Sue Brown were the clinical psychologists. They were in that camp, and they understood linear systems very well. What they understood about linear systems, though, as well as them being highly effective or could be in the right hands, right, somebody who's highly trained, there was also the possibility that harm could be done with that system if being utilized by somebody who was not well trained.
Yeah,
Right?
somebody has to be qualified for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they didn't like that piece, and they always wanted neurofeedback to be more accessible. So their goal was to develop a neurofeedback system that was safe, easy to use. You couldn't overtrain with it. It was fault tolerant and fail safe. Right? That's what
Right.
Neuroptimal is.
Right. So where you're unique is not just the fact that you use Neuroptimal for your clients, and not a whole lot of people in the world know about it, but
Mm.
you also provide therapy, talk
Hmm.
therapy in addition to, or combined
Yeah.
with, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's combined
And
with.
because
Yeah.
you're certified in Neuroptimal plus all the other qualifications, even, you know, you see people in your office, but you can also rent the systems to people that are
That's
at a
true.
distance.
Yeah.
They can do it in their home, and because Neuroptimal is so easy to use,
Hmm.
you're able to, give people a very good value for their money. And you
Absolutely.
include therapy with it, right?
Yeah. That's 100% correct. Um, Again, the developers of Neuroptimal, their goal was to create more accessibility and safety in a system, right? And so, because Neuroptimal is easy to use, easy to set up, it's completely fault tolerant and fail safe. Um, it's not running a protocol. It's really relying on your central nervous system to make the shifts it wants to make. It does allow for this system to be rented out quite easily. It doesn't create or it doesn't demand a lot of skill and training. I can teach somebody how to use it within 20 minutes, 25 minutes, right? And how to run sessions for themselves, right? As a clinician, as a counselor, I use it in my office, as you just pointed out. So I combine the two, counseling and neurofeedback, in my office. A lot of people, Canada is full of remote locations, very
Right,
remote
right.
locations. And so there's lots of people who can't access my services in town. So it makes a lot of sense if they can rent it. I can rent a system to somebody in Yellowknife or Swift Current or Nelson. And because of technology, I can have meetings with them in the same way that you and I are meeting right now, and I can provide them with a oversight as to how they do their training. I'm on board to help them track their progress as well, because most people who do this, they want to see some progress of some sort, right? So if I'm assisting them and helping them understand what it is they're doing, the context of how they're doing it, et cetera, and what to look for, then generally they get great results. So renting a system is highly cost effective, as you already pointed out. You can do it from the comfort of your own home, and you've got my guidance and supervision over that that rental
Yeah,
period
that's
too.
awesome.
Yeah.
So where do you see the technology? Well, actually, before we go to that, do you have a particular story of somebody transforming their life with your help with neurofeedback that you would like to relate?
I don't have one. I have so many. It, it's it, it
Pick the
you
one that
know
impacted you the most.
The one that impacted me the most, the one that really sold me on this, was the fact, as I pointed out already, and you've noted as well, is I work with kids. Children, unlike adults, really don't have a great interest in changing, right? This is what I know as a clinical counselor. One of the first things I learned is that parents would bring their kid in and go, please fix Johnny, or please fix Susie, right? Or, they want somebody to take care of their child. Their child may not even be aware that some of the things that they're doing are problematic, right? The
Right.
impulsiveness or distraction, or the meltdowns, right? Those are all signs of a dysregulated brain. What was so cool about using Neuroptimal, right, is as I watched this practitioner and as I started to do it myself, you would see children change, right? And again, these are young kids, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're not that consciously aware of themselves, right? So they don't have a vested interest in changing, but they did change, right? And this was as reported by the parents. The parents would go, wow, like, geez, we've only done like 10 sessions and he seems so much calmer. He's more responsive, right? I, I, I called him for dinner the other night and he came the very first time. Usually I have to call, 5, 6 times, or I have to tap him on the shoulder. Come on, it's dinner time, right? First time he came. So when I started hearing stories like that, it was like, when children are changing, and again, they don't have a vested interest in doing that, right? They're not even aware of themselves, but they're responding, right? They're responding positively. That's what the parents were reporting to me. So I was like, you know what? That is what completely sold me. The other part that sold me is you look at the research. Early research was done on cats, right? Cats don't have a vested interest in changing, right? And yet we were changing behavior in cat behavior, right? Cat behavior. I've never used that term
Wasn't
before.
that NASA that was doing those studies with the cats?
It was scientists who were related to NASA. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
they were working with NASA, and so there's a long history here. There's good, solid research here that shows that this technology works. Whether
And
it's
this is a lot different than downloading a meditation app on your phone, right?
very different, yes.
Yeah.
We're placing sensors on the scalp, and clips on the ears. We're tracking the EEG. We've got paste and sensors, conductive paste and sensors attached, C3 and C4. We're recording electrical activity over 33 minutes. The software is processing that and responding, inviting the brain to change in response to what it's tracking.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know one of your other goals is to introduce the technology to more wellness practitioners, all the way
Yeah.
from psychologists to, I guess, a life coach, right? So,
Sure. Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
you have, you're certified, you train them, you're able to help them get started as well
Mm.
and help people similar to the way you're helping people, right?
Yeah, I've got two levels of training in terms of Neuroptimal. So I've got the basic certification as well as their advanced certification. I'm also an instructor. I'm a certified instructor for Neuroptimal, and so I teach those levels of certification. And you're absolutely right. This does not have to be seen as a mental health tool, right? This is the best way I think about it is it's a peak performance tool for anybody's brain. So anybody can use this system to improve their own brain performance, right? I like to think
Are
about
you,
it as
does everybody get improvements with it, or is there like a percentage? What would you say?
you know, every once in a while, very, very, I would say there's probably, in my experience over, this is my 15th year, I've probably had maybe 4 or 5 people who did not see what they wanted to see, what they wanted to see. I saw change. They didn't see what they wanted to see, right? And so some of the things that can um, constrain progress with a training program like Neuroptimal is what we call extrinsic constraints. So if somebody's on a mix of medications, it's not unusual for me to meet somebody who's struggling with mental health challenges, and they may be on 4 different medications, right?
Yeah.
And they may have been on those for years, right? I met a kid just 2 weeks ago. He's 15. He's been on 4 different heavy medications for ADHD since he was 5, right? And now he's grade 11, and he's like, I've always been on these meds. I don't even know what it's like to be me. I really want to get off of these as possible. So, I've just started with him. And so that's the goal for him, is to really try and reduce the dependence on medications. It's certainly very, very common to see.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say to people that are considering neurofeedback?
First, I like to get a sense of what it is they're trying to address, right? Because some things it just can't do. I'm starting to go bald. Is this going to improve my hair growth? No, no, no. I've got a sore shoulder, right? I've got a sore shoulder from an injury from a car accident. Is it going to help with that?
Doesn't
Not really.
neurofeedback, can
No.
it help with chronic pain?
It can help with chronic pain, but chronic pain is a little bit different than, say, a physical injury from a motor vehicle accident, right?
Okay.
It's a great point that you make, though. So many times, and I've seen this repeatedly, people who come to me with fibromyalgia or chronic pain that's associated with emotional dysregulation, right? Or people who are in high stress occupations, or people who push themselves very hard and have pushed themselves very hard throughout their lives. I see this sort of repetitive theme where they are often affected by chronic pain. There's a woman who I'm seeing right now who that was exactly what was happening for her. She had been to see a naturopath. She'd been doing some yoga. She'd be doing all sorts of things trying to address the chronic pain. Started to do Neuroptimal. Within 5 sessions, boom, it started to fall away.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it
awesome.
was amazing. And she also has seasonal affective disorder, and so it's almost like clockwork. She can literally go, okay, hey, it's December. Here comes my seasonal affective disorder, right? What's interesting is this year it still came on, but it was far less intense, and the duration and the duration and intensity was significantly reduced. Right, the chronic pain has not come back. She's done probably about 20 sessions now. I started seeing her in the summer. The chronic pain has not come back.
So the results are relatively permanent, right?
Can be, can be. It really depends what we're trying to do.
And
And
it
it really
also
depends.
depends on the continued trauma.
Well, yeah, if I'm trying to reduce anxiety for somebody who is currently living in a trauma situation, right? A traumatic situation, say that, again, the household, for example, which is chaotic and unsafe, that's just not even really appropriate to start, in my mind. I think the number one thing we need to do is create some safety for you. We got to get you in a safe place, right?
Right.
Then we should start the training, because just getting you into a safe place may reduce your symptoms
But what
right
about
off the
first
bat.
responders, right? So they
Well,
have
first,
TBI or PTSD.
mhm.
And so would you suggest neurofeedback for them? But they're constantly going into that
Yeah,
battle, so to speak, right?
yeah. Those what an interesting bunch. First responders. A very good friend of mine he was a clinical counselor first, and then he became a firefighter. And he
Oh,
actually
wow.
phoned me up. I'd lost track of him for a bit, and he phoned me up after about 5 years. He said, "Hey, let's go for coffee. I got to tell you something." And I was like, "Sure, okay, let's go for coffee." He goes, "Guess what I did?" And he tells me he became a firefighter. He had a bit of a dare from his friends. His friends were like, you could never do this, right? So he took up the challenge and he became a firefighter. He'd been working in the field, and he said, again, he was a clinical counselor first, so he had all this knowledge and education from being a counselor. Becomes a firefighter, and he goes, man, you would not believe what these guys have to do, and what they're trained to do. Um, you're trained to defy your impulses, right? Here's a burning vehicle, right? You got to run in and try and rescue somebody from that burning vehicle, right? My response to a burning vehicle, I'm running the other direction, right? Because I think
Right.
it's going to explode, right? Of course, these guys are trained to defy their senses. So the fight or flight response, they have to try and ignore that, right? And run into the danger. So imagine doing that, defying your senses, and in a sense training your senses to ignore that response, right? Over a 20-30 year period, right? That creates harm, right? That creates harm. All those trauma exposures. There's a client of mine who I've been seeing for quite a number of years. Couldn't count how many trauma exposures has had. Motor vehicle accidents, burning houses, drug addicts, overdoses, things like that. What's happened for that individual is the empathy was eroded away. The more exposure he had, the less and less effective he felt he was in terms of doing the right thing. So he became very jaded, right? The other thing that firefighters in particular deal with is sleep is compromised significantly for these guys, because
Yeah.
working in the fire hall situation, that bell can go off at any point and they have to respond. And so it could be 2 a.m, it could be 3 p.m, it could be multiple times over the course of an evening. So a lot of these guys have very disrupted sleep. They're not getting sleep on a regular cycle, and there's tons of research that
Yeah.
shows the effect of that in terms of concentration, in terms of your emotional regulation, your ability to regulate your emotions, in terms of focus, attention. You think about how all those are compromised as a result of that job, right? What are we doing for these guys in order to help them be at their best? Right. At one point, I was actually working with these guys these firefighters who I know. I was like, hey, can we somehow do a pilot study, plant a neurofeedback system in a fire hall over the course of like a couple of months, and track progress as these guys do training?
Right.
I would really like to see what the results of that was.
So even though that they continually get stressed, even after they start neurofeedback, they should still do it, but
Yeah,
they should
yeah,
also continue to train and not
yeah,
think of it as a beginning and end state with
yeah.
it. Would that be right?
Yeah, just to back up a little bit, you asked, are the results permanent? Well, if you're constantly being exposed to stress, right, and some stresses are bigger than others, big stresses can cause the brain to fall back on old ways. That's what I see. However, the people that I work with most, neurodiverse individuals, generally what I see is there's not a lot of fallback. There's not a lot of regression, right? Even when
Right.
stresses do occur. I'll give you a really great example. This is my poster child. I've been seeing since 2018. The first 20 sessions, just amazing results. Um, uh, as we and then her trajectory was just absolutely beautiful. Reduced her anxiety, kept her anxiety down. I was seeing her twice a week initially, but then we reduced it down to once a week. And then when COVID hit, I didn't see her at all. When COVID hit, she chose not to come in for sessions. My office was actually closed. I didn't actually see her for about 1.75 years. And I was really curious. Hey, did everything, were the gains sustained over that period of time? Because with COVID, a lot of the mental health supports were taken away, right? Couldn't go to the gym. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't get together with friends. So I was really worried about this individual that with that infrastructure kind of pulled away, and she wasn't able to come and do training, I really thought things would kind of spiral for her. That wasn't the case
Right.
at all. It wasn't the case at all. Her growth continued throughout COVID, even though she wasn't doing training. And so when I finally did get around to seeing her again back in, we restarted in 2022, she was doing great. There had been a slight little bit of a regression in her anxiety, but nothing major at all. It was amazing. I was so impressed. And this kid now, years later, is just on fire. She's just doing so well. And she would probably be the first to admit that It's all the result of this training. She had seen multiple counselors. She had been on medication. She had been, through behavioral consultation and all these various treatments for autism. None of them touched the emotional dysregulation, except
Right.
for neurofeedback training.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that's pretty awesome. So
yeah.
you where do you see the future of this? Do you think that like the
Hmm.
advances are going to continue, obviously with technology advancing?
Well, the beautiful thing about Neuroptimal, and this is why I use it, is the ease of use, the portability, and the results. I get very consistent results. It's easy to use. It's easy to implement. Um, More and more neurotechnologies are arriving on the scene every day. Neuroptimal, because of its ease of use, the number of users has increased significantly over the past 5 years. It's now, it's not unusual that you see Neuroptimal being used in very remote places, but also all over the world. Every I can't. There is a map, a global map on Neuroptimal website, I believe, where you can see where users are, and literally all over the world. It used to be, when I first got into this, there was a few people in my neighborhood, hardly anybody in the middle part of Canada. There was like maybe one or two people. Now it's quite a different thing, and it's very different in Europe. Like France, Italy, in the UK, Neuroptimal's just exploded. More and more people are
Yeah,
are using it.
I have a client in the Netherlands, neurofeedback client that we
There we
help.
go.
So he's been doing really well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's so much of what holds it back from is knowledge and information, accurate information. Um, the biggest thing I run into, the biggest challenge I have in running sessions, is helping people understand that this actually works. People are fearful of wires being stuck in their heads. They have images of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in their mind, where Jack Nicholson getting ECT.
yeah. Just to be
Um,
clear, those senses are just reading brainwave patterns. They're not putting
yeah,
anything in. The
but
only stimulant is the sound, right?
the best way to think about these sensors is they're listening. They're just
Yeah,
listening and recording electrical activity, right?
yeah.
So, but I remember when I first got a system and I was hooking my mom up. Those wires, she was wire phobic. She's like, "Whoa, you're sticking that on my head? Hold on."
Right.
And and this is somebody who had actually done biofeedback before too, right?
Oh well.
Back in
Okay.
the 70s and 80s. Yeah. So my mom actually understood the concept, but even just the fact that I was sticking wires on her head,
Right.
on her
Right.
head really made her kind of, ooh, like, yeah. But there's a lot of misconceptions. So, uh, knowledge, information, accurate information is really one of the things that still needs to happen. Most people don't even know it's an option. Most doctors don't know about it. Most counselors don't know about it.
That's why we set up
Psychologists.
all about neurofeedback, right?
Yeah.
We want to
Yeah.
educate the public and
Yeah.
get this exposed because it needs to happen. It's time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 100%.
And there's
Yeah.
so much background to it, but again, it's so people just aren't generally aware of it, right? Even
That's
today,
right. Yeah, and I understand why doctors don't recommend it. A friend of mine is a doctor, and he said, it was never part of my training. Pharmacology was all part of my training, right? So he's well versed in pharmacology, but neurofeedback, absolutely zero training in that. If the doctor is coming from outside of North America, the chances that they'll be a little more open-minded to something like neurofeedback increases. I've met doctors from uh, South Africa and from Europe. They were trained over there and much more receptive to, wow, oh, what is it? They're very curious, like, oh, this is a different way of doing this. Wow, this is
well,
cool.
they're more
This
open
is
to
Here's the
alternative
thing.
methods of healing too,
Yeah.
right?
Well, here's the thing. This is a holistic approach. There's no drugs. There's no side effects. It's a training program. It's teaching your brain to really regulate the way it's supposed to be regulating. It's
Yeah,
supposed to be flexible. It's supposed to be resilient. And really, that's what we're trying to get the brain back to doing, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating. It's really I think this is going to help so many people understand, what can be done and how it works, right? And that it's real. So I really appreciate your time with this. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of end on
Well,
here?
The one thing I wanted to say is I really appreciate you asking me or inviting me, because my goal, I'm not a young guy anymore, and I really want to help people. That's why I became a clinical counselor. That's why I'm in this field. And there's not enough people like myself doing neurofeedback, and it's high time that that changed. And
Yeah,
so a platform like this helps people understand that this is very accessible, and this can be very, very effective for all sorts of very common conditions that are automatically, or not automatically, but the doctor's initial response is, okay, we'll write you a prescription for this. You know, please, please leave. This is my message to parents. Please leave no stone unturned in terms of looking at the safe alternatives to medication, right? Even for ADHD, one of the best things you can do for ADHD is just get the kid active. You know, physical fitness is one of the best things you can do for ADHD. Constant, regular physical fitness.
right.
You know, entirely safe. You know, but yeah, so investigate all avenues before you go to meds. Is
That's
my
actually a
message.
very good way of looking at it, for sure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Medication should be the last resort, not the first resort.
And I'm not trying to, as a clinician, I know that medication plays a role too, right? There's some circumstances which are highly unstable, and that's the goal of the meds, is to stabilize things, right? We want to make sure that people aren't harming themselves or harming others. So we have to stabilize certain circumstances
Yeah,
which are
but
very
is like
elevated.
even SS, what is it called? SSRs, serotonin.
SSRIs? Yeah,
Yes, those ones. Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Those are prescribed to children or to teenagers, that
Can be.
have, you
Yeah,
know, suicidal thoughts and things like that.
yeah,
But it's actually linked to increased suicides.
yeah. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, and you
I did not
can't say
study.
anything about that, but
Yeah,
I
I
can,
didn't
okay,
study
because I don't have
I
those
didn't.
credentials.
Okay, I didn't study pharmacology, and so I always tell people, if they want to do neurofeedback and they're on meds, please chat with your clinician, the prescribing doctor, to say that this is what you're doing, and should I be if any adjustment of the medication is to occur, they're in charge of that.
Absolutely.
They're absolutely
Absolutely.
in
But
charge of
before
that.
you even go down that
Yeah,
route,
yeah, yeah,
try other things. Like my
yeah.
son was having some problems as when he was younger, and went to see a psychiatrist, and that was the first thing is take these drugs. And I did, my Google research, right? But
Sure.
people criticize that. But you're looking at studies, you're looking at people that
Oh
do
yeah,
know what they're talking about. So there's nothing
yeah.
wrong with doing that. And I
No,
started learning about it, and it
yeah,
horrified me, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah.
for me, which is unlike you, you can't even say those things. But for me, it's like I think there needs to be way more research
Hmm.
and clarity on those things because
Yeah.
that's not good, right?
No,
So
no.
anybody that is watching this that pushes back, sorry, that's my opinion.
Yeah. You're a concerned parent, though. A
Yeah,
concerned parent should always be doing research and really investigating other avenues before they go to what I would refer to as like the big gun, which is,
yeah,
medications are a big gun. That's creating a big effect to a developing brain, for a
for
child's
sure.
brain.
Yeah,
Do you really need to do that? Did we really explore everything, or
and it's
are
so hard to
are
say
we
too,
taking?
right? Like, because when you're in that situation, having been there, it is
Mm,
scary, a very
yeah,
scary feeling.
yeah,
And you want to have a quick fix or something that you can rely
hmm,
on that's going to,
yeah,
you know, keep your kids safe, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
at the same time, you know, this double-edged sword. So it really depends who
Absolutely.
you work with, right?
Yeah. And this is the thing is, I like that point. Depends who you work with. What I like to do, if somebody's saying, "Oh, my kid's got this problem. My kid's got this problem. I got to really solve this problem." Well, my first question is it happening everywhere? Or is it just happening at the school? Is it happening on the playground? Is it happening
Oh, that's
at
a good
home?
point. Good way of looking
You
at it.
know,
Yeah,
we I want to get multiple perspectives on that child before we make any decisions, right? If it's
yeah,
happening everywhere, if it's quite pervasive in every domain, okay, let's look a little closer here at what the symptoms are. What is the theme throughout all of that? But if it's only happening at school, not happening at home, not happening with friends outside of school, not happening in his extracurricular activities, maybe the problem is at the school. Maybe the problem is the style of teaching, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
often because teachers
Well,
can, not all
yeah.
teachers are created equal.
I've
Some
learned that too.
are I've worked in
Right.
a lot of schools and I've seen amazing teachers, and I've
Me too.
seen some that are just way too rigid, and did not meet the child at the right level to meet
Yeah.
their needs. Right? They
Yeah.
weren't recognizing that this child was learning differently, and
Yeah.
they were unable or disinterested in changing in order to meet that kid's needs. So I think as
Right.
teachers, we have a responsibility to meet people at their level, to understand them, so we can best address their learning style.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So, just so people aren't wondering, my son ended up doing neurofeedback with a practitioner out of Calgary,
Hmm. Nice,
and it really turned things around for him. It really did.
excellent.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of all we have time for, but
Okay.
people can look at your profile and they can
Hmm.
find out more. They can go to your website. But I wanted to just clarify you offer a free consultation as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they can find out more, ask you some questions, and that will be
Hmm.
linked in your profile as well. Okay, so
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah, so that's awesome. I guess that's about it. Is there anything else you want to say?
Um, Not at this point. I think we covered a lot of ground there. We covered a
We
lot of
did.
ground,
We
and
did.
it's funny. I have a lot of ADHD qualities, so I can kind of veer off in certain
Maybe we should
directions.
do more neurooptimal.
Well, I use Neuroptimal regularly, and quite honestly, it's made a massive transformation in my ability to do the work. I'm more grounded. I'm more present. I'm far more effective as a clinician, and more expansive in my
And
thoughts.
you're always very positive, right?
Well, that's the
Not
biggest
everybody
thing, man.
is, but people that
It's
do that on an ongoing basis, they all seem to be positive, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Neuroptimal keeps me in a sweet spot. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm
Well,
going to end
thank you
there.
so much, Doug. Have an awesome day. And,
Okay.
I highly recommend anybody that's considering Neuroptimal take a look.
Okay. Thanks so much. I look forward to connecting again. All the best.